So delighted to introduce Dr. Bob Sutor. He's been a technical leader and executive in the IT industry for over 40 years. Bob's industry role is to advance quantum technologies by building strong business, partner, technical, and educational ecosystems. He is Vice President and Chief Quantum Advocate at Infleqtion, ColdQuanta, a hardware and software company working on quantum computing and sensing. He's also an Adjunct Professor in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering at the University at Buffalo. So more than 2 decades of Bob's career were spent in IBM Research in New York, and during his time there, he worked on or led efforts in symbolic mathematical computation, optimization, AI, blockchain, and quantum computing. He's also an executive on the software side of IBM in areas of middleware, software, and Linux, mobile, open source, and emerging industry standards. Bob is a theoretical mathematician by training, has a Ph.D. from Princeton University, an undergraduate degree from Harvard College, and is an author, including a book about quantum computing called Dancing with Qubits, published recently in 2019. So we're thrilled to have Bob here today, and I'll pass it over. Thanks, Bob.
All right. Hi, thank you. So, where we are. Okay, so welcome to the middle of the second day of the conference, the highly coveted right before lunch slot here. I give many talks, lots of places around the world on quantum computing, and occasionally I talk, they sort of pay me to talk about the company, but I've been doing quantum computing with several of my colleagues in the audience for 6 or 7 years now. And so I've seen the developments, I've seen the real work, the real research, I've seen the absolutely ridiculous hype that is associated to it, and not like hype is a good thing, hype as in being dishonest, right? I mean, there are lines here. So I'm very optimistic, of course, about quantum computing, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But I want to just address some of these real issues, right? Some of the core things don't make it to marketing copy, right, in reality. The fact is, we're not going to have any quantum computer within 2 or 3 years that is better than classical. We are simply not. And that may be true for 5 years or so. But will vendors want to take your money? Absolutely. Should we be doing great research? Absolutely. Should we be putting together these systems? So, I, in the introduction, said I've been around for over 40 years. This industry has cycles, right? I mean, new things come along. You can go back and you say, okay, well, this is where people said this. This is where they tried that, right? This is where all those actually failed because it was a stupid idea the last 3 times somebody tried this, right? And quantum is really no different. Quantum computing, or the silent side of this, which is quantum sensing and quantum networking, which many people feel will actually be giving value a whole lot sooner. But today I'm going to focus on quantum computing. And again, you see a lot of marketing, beautiful slides. I want to have a little fun with this. For those of you who may not know the term, it's an English idiom about the elephant in the room. Sometimes it's done as the elephant in the living room, of all places, right? But what it is, it's this kind of vaguely uncomfortable thing that people really wish you wouldn't bring up, because everything else is so cheerful and wonderful and things like this. But gosh, if you talk about this, it might delay sales, right? Or it might cut into grants or things like this. But in my experience, and certainly is the case with many of the reputable companies that are involved with this, is that, especially when it comes to these long-term technology plays, you've got to be honest, right? Because if you're not, it comes out. So I just want to raise a few things related to this, and we'll have 5 elephants that we will talk about. So the first one is quantum computing is taking longer than we thought it would, or maybe longer than we said it would. Now, we did in our, and here I'm speaking from the industry perspective, we did say it would take a long time, right? I sometimes liken this, though, to if you're going on a car trip with children and you say, this is going to take 3 hours. The kids are in the back seat, right? This is going to take 3 hours. And after 15 minutes, the kids say, are we there yet? And you say, no, we said it's going to take 3 hours. And then the kid says, but I want to be there, right? And maybe those are your VCs. I want you to be profitable, or things like this. So there was a saying, which I'll put in a historical concept here, and bear with me here, okay? I was trying something here. So this is a image. This is Hannibal, right? Hannibal was from Carthage, and way back about in the 3rd century BC, there were what were called the Punic Wars. Basically, Rome and Carthage fighting across the Mediterranean for dominance. And of course, you know there's an elephant, right? So, unfortunately, Hannibal spoke Punic, which, as we all know, is an extinct dialect of Phoenician, which we all know too, of course. So I took a little liberty and put it in Greek. I'm sorry, it's not ancient Greek, but it seems like for 2,500 years, or at least 50, 30 years, people have been saying we're going to have quantum advantage in 10 years. And when I first started getting involved with this, this was kind of the attitude. 10 more years, just 10 more years. And every year it was 10 more years, right? We've improved. Every year it's 3 to 5 more years, right? So it's not 10, it's just 3 to 5 more years. But it's going to take time because these systems have to get big enough and powerful enough. You know, I'm really sorry, but you know, it's great progress that you have 20, 50, 100 qubits, and I don't care what letters you put next to them. Last week in London, there was a pharmaceutical company speaking about using quantums for pharmaceutical, and he described this as saying, well, the very first thing we do with developing any of the typical drugs we do that involve proteins, there's this one molecule, and let's say you want to compute its ground state energy, which is kind of a quantum chemistry sort of thing. We brought everybody together. How many qubits do we need? We need 9 million. So it's nice to say quantum computing promises, and I'm all for that, and I'm very optimistic, but nobody's developing new drugs in 2 years with honest-to-goodness quantum computing. 9 million, and moreover, adding qubits is not like adding memory in your laptop. You don't buy a little thing from Amazon and plug it in, right? It's much, much more complicated than that. So it's going to take a while, it's going to take a lot of research. Now, among the applications, people like to talk about machine learning. It even has an acronym, QML, quantum machine learning. To be clear, this is research. This is not on the cusp of being available and useful. And maybe it will someday, but there's some real practical problems, especially right now in the era of noisy computers. And it's basic. You can't get the data into the quantum machine before the quantum machine, you've used up all its time, what's called its coherence time. You can't load enough data. So all you are left with is a toy problem with a little bit of data that a classical way of doing it is just as good. So it's called the input problem in machine. And so quantum machine learning, it's interesting. There are some issues, as I said, in this NISQ era. I don't think we will see any type of real improvement. It's great to study, but it's long term, and that's the point when I say research. And keeping with our theme here of elephants, the Zoological Society of London, it was a very nice machine learning application where they could take a satellite photo of the savannah in Africa, and they could, in fact, identify 1,000 elephants in and among the trees and so forth and differentiate them, right? There's no way you can work with 1,000 elephants in a quantum computer today. You cannot load that information. And for all the exponential aspects of 2 to the power and lots long numbers and things like that, once again, it goes away. So image processing, no, it's just not there yet. It may be. Now, the next thing here is it's difficult to measure just how powerful, how useful a quantum computer is. There have been several proposed benchmarks. Quantum volume is one of them. CLOPS, where you take into account timing. There are application level benchmarks from the QEDC and so forth. Generally, you know, if it's related to what you actually want to do, that's a better way of measuring this. But even if you boil down the list, and this is an extended list of things you would have to look at, and you can go to any vendor, any provider, and say, well, tell me what your shot rate is, right? How many qubits do you have? I was shocked to discover about 4 years ago that not only do you have to say how many qubits you have to say, and do they work? Because dead qubits are so useful, right? And, but there are all these types of things, and these are very reasonable because this is an engineering problem, it's a science problem, and with engineering there are constraints and there are trade-offs. And so some of these might be better than others, right? So you might say, hey, I have a lot of time to do a computation. My coherence time is really long, except it takes a long time to do any one thing, right? So there's not that much more value in saying, hey, I've got all the time in the world, but I'm really slow at doing anything. So somebody that only has a shorter period of time but has very fast operations might in fact win in different ways. But then you have to balance that with things like circuit depth. How many things can you actually do? And again, we don't need 12, we don't need 100. We need, I'll just use the same number, 9 million. Right, Shor's algorithm, we need 20 million qubits and probably 2 to 3 times that in terms of number of operations. So our numbers are all off by orders of magnitude. And it's great to be excited, and work has to continue, but get real of what you're doing here. And don't claim victory. There's a quote, well, a saying that I really don't like, you know, which goes, this is a marathon, not a sprint. But I don't like it for various reasons, but let me recast it somewhat shorter distances. If this were a 15K race, let's say, for quantum computing, we are in the first K. That's about reasonable. If you want to think about years relating to where quantum computing is compared to development of classical computers, we're in the early 1960s. Okay, so, and that's fine, because we're now here, right? This was a supercomputer 30 years ago, right? We'll get there. But I guess my message here is, you know, be careful about buying very expensive toys that don't do any better than what you've got. Now, the other thing is about error correction. I'll just pick out my phone right here. If I have an image, I take a photo, and I come back in 6 months, that photo is exactly the same. You know, none of the pixels have changed colors or anything like this. Quantum computers are notoriously bad about that now. That is the N, noise, in noisy intermediate stage quantum computing. And we're learning that maybe there's too much noise, that the proposed methods are just not going to really show us this quantum advantage, right, that we see. And I define quantum advantage as quantum plus classical systems working together, being significantly better than classical systems alone. And you must care about quantum advantage. That's the whole point, right? You don't worry about short-term sales, right? Well, you may, that's nice to get, you know, money's good. But the point is that that's what we're for, and that's what we're going. And we're not talking about a little bit better. It's got to be significantly better, or why bother? And keeping with our friend here, it's a somewhat fuzzy elephant here, and it seems, all right, well, at that size, you can sort of figure out, even if I hadn't, constantly been showing you elephants here. We're going to need error correction, and sometimes getting to the point of a very difficult calculation of doing risk analysis, this degree of fuzziness or logistics, right, or anything is just not sufficient. And look, you got to have our friend here at full resolution, right? I mean, that's what it boils down to. Approximations just may not do it. And then our final elephant is this, which is none of the quantum computers that we have today will be sufficient by themselves. And so our pachyderm friend, one more time, we are not going to have these monolithic 9 million qubit quantum computers. We just can't. We can't control them. There are lots of problems with them. And so what we have to do is we have to build up the capacity from smaller quantum computers. And these could be different chips. So Jay Gambetta talks about how they will basically network their chips together. If you're doing ion traps, you have to connect traps optically, same with neutral atoms and things like this. So the point being is that really the quantum computing futures of the system are reasonably sized quantum computers of very high quality that are connected together, either very locally or in a larger sense. And quantum networking, I think, is a very important term. Stop talking about quantum communications. It's quantum networking. Even inside a quantum computer, we're going to have to do networking. The idea is much broader than classical networking. I have some quantum encoded information someplace, maybe in the middle of a calculation, maybe as a result of a sensor reading, right? Maybe out of quantum memory, and I need to move it somewhere else. That is quantum networking, right? And it's not necessarily easy to do, and it's underfunded, and there's some great companies involved. There's a conference, in fact, this week in Glasgow about it. But this is often overlooked. Sensing, we'll get there, we'll get to atomic clocks, governments care about this, but if we don't get networking, we're going to have expensive toy quantum computers that are too little. That's just the way it is. Now, I want to end on an optimistic note, from my sponsor. We are certainly interested in Infleqtion, formerly called ColdQuanta, in using neutral atoms for quantum computers. It's a very versatile technology. This is a glass cell or an atomic prism. It's about 2.5 inches tall. In there, right now, this first generation, we're focusing on about 100 qubits. In the lab, we've done about 1,200 what I'll call proto-qubits, right? They're not real qubits, right? They're not really there. You actually have to control them. But the point is, these 1,200 proto-qubits fit in the width of a human hair. Now that's interesting. That's squeezing an awful lot of power in there. And we think ultimately we can get to 10,000. So we're not stopping this work, but we recognize that it's R&D, right? No false promises on what you can do. And then just going back and finishing with the introduction, is one of my tasks this week is to finish this second edition of this book, which I seem to have forever. I have to submit it by Sunday, and I am absolutely bullish on quantum computing. More and more people have to learn it. We have to train it. There will be a transition more and more to software. And so for any of these conferences I go to, you're not talking about software enough, okay? Do you talk about transistors with your friends, with your iPhone? You talk about apps, or you just use them, right? That transition is going on now. Hardware matters, yes. But I would say any quantum conference, at least if it's focusing on computing, should be 50% software. So there's a challenge. So thank you very much.